There are a variety of colorants you can use for your soap. However, you must make sure that you always use cosmetically approved colorants and never use food coloring, as this will stain your skin and your bath. Some colors will fade in your soap, and some can morph into a different color in cold processed soap due to the pH of the batter. As a general rule, use 1 teaspoon of color per pound or 500 grams of oils. Mineral pigments are oxides and ultramarines. These days, both are synthetically produced to ensure purity and reduce the level of heavy metals in them. However, they are nature identical, which basically means they have the same molecular makeup as the pigment that was originally mined from the earth. They are the easiest colors to use in soap making, as they don't fade or morph in your soaps, and the colors are very true. Here's a photo of some pigments with the finished soap next to them, and you can see how close the finished result is to the initial color. Pigments color the soap by dispersing through the mixture. They're hard to mix by hand, and it's best to use a mini mixer to mix them, to prevent getting speckles or streaks in your soap. For a single color, you can add them directly to your oils. For multiple colors, add them at a thin trace. You can mix the colors with water or glycerin. Use 1 teaspoon of color with 1 tablespoon of water or glycerin. You can also put the dry powder directly onto the top of the soap batter. Put your stick blender on top of it, push it down and pulse it in to mix it. To use in your soaps, add 1 teaspoon of dry color or 3 teaspoons of diluted color per pound or 500 grams of oils. Oxides come in yellow, red, orange, brown, black, chromium green, and hydrated chromium oxide, which is a teal color. They are not light sensitive, so they don't fade. They're not affected by the pH of your soap, and so they don't morph. Red oxide usually colors the lather of the soap. Titanium dioxide is a natural white, opaque pigment. It is a mineral which is processed to remove impurities. It comes in both water and oil soluble versions. Use 1 teaspoon of the powder to 1 tablespoon of liquid, and use a mini mixer to mix it as it clumps easily. Glycerin is a naturally occurring byproduct of soap making, and it adds cleansing and moisturizing properties to your soap. However, it can cause glycerin rivers, which are a mottled or cracked effect in your soap that look a bit like rivers. The glycerin rivers don't affect the quality of your soap, but they can spoil the appearance if you've done some intricate designs. There are some things you can do to avoid glycerin rivers. Do a water discount of 10% or higher, as the water contributes to the rivers. Disperse your titanium dioxide in oil rather than water, for the same reasons. Soap at a lower temperature or even at room temperature. Check that your fragrance is not one that is prone to causing glycerin rivers. You should be able to find this out from your supplier. Ultramarines come in pink, blue, and purple. They are not light sensitive, so they don't fade. And they are not affected by the pH of your soap, and so they don't morph. Liquid pigments are ultramarines and oxides that are mixed into glycerin. You can buy them ready-made, or you can make your own. And there's a description in the resource section to this lecture on how to do that. Color blocks are pigments that are in melt and pour soap, and these shouldn't be used for cold processed soap. They are great for using in melt and pour soap though. Mica is what gives cosmetics sparkle. It comes in tiny flakes. The bigger the flake, the more surface area there is for the light to reflect off it, which then creates more sparkle. Mica works best in transparent products, like melt and pour soap, but it still creates a shimmery or pearlescent look to cold processed soap. It's great to use to decorate the tops of your soap, whether you sprinkle the mica over the top of your soap or mix it with alcohol and drizzle it over. For a single color, you can add your mica directly to the oils. For multiple colors, add at a thin trace. You can use it direct into your soap as the powder, Use 1 teaspoon of colour with 1 tablespoon of oil. If you use the powder, dump it on the top of your batter, push down and pulse with your stick blender. Some micas are natural and some are synthetic. So how do you know which is which? Well, you need to check out the inky provided by the mica supplier. If the inky just says mica, it's natural. Mica is coloured either by using dye, FD&C or DNC dyes, or mineral pigments such as oxides and ultramarines. This inky for yellow mica says mica FD&C Yellow Lake, so this tells us that it's a natural mica that's been coloured using a dye, FD&C. If it reads mica iron oxides, that tells us that it's a natural mica that's been coloured using iron oxide. Micas coloured with dye produce a whole rainbow of colours. However, they can fade, bleed and migrate. They can also morph and change colour. Check with your soap supplier to see if this happens with the colour you're buying. I used this lovely turquoise mica in my design, only to find that it had turned into a wishy-washy purple by the next day. I was very disappointed. Mica with pigment produces a rainbow of colours. There's no colour fading, no colour bleeding or migration. Also no morphing or colour change. And these can be synthetic or natural. Dyes use FD&C colours, which stands for Food, Drug and Cosmetic. These are certified and allowed by the US for the food, pharmaceutical, cosmetics and personal care industry. Lakes are dye with metallic salt. They tend to bleed and morph in cold process soap. They colour by dissolving and binding with soap particles. But they can clump together and leave speckles throughout your soap, so make sure you dissolve them in water before adding. Dyes and lakes produce a rainbow of colours, but they can fade. They will bleed between layers or swirls in soap, and can bleed onto washcloths, and colour the lather if too much colour is used. They can also morph. They are synthetic. I avoid these in soaps altogether. Lakes are great in bath bombs though. In soap, use 1/4 teaspoon per pound or 500 grams of oils. Cosmetic pigments are a blend of FD&C dyes and DNC dyes with a polymer coating. They are typically neons and bright colours. They are heat resistant, so won't be affected by any gel phase. They contain dyes coated in plastic. The dyes don't dissolve and tint the mixture, so there is no bleeding. They clump badly, so use a mini mixer and mix 1 teaspoon of colour to 2 teaspoons of glycerin to make them blend in easier. Cosmetic clays colour by the suspension of particles in your soap. They produce a pastel range of cream, yellow, grey, green, purple, red and orange. They tend not to fade and they won't bleed or migrate. They're not affected by the pH, so they won't morph. Clays draw moisture, so mix them with water before adding them to your soap. Add an equal amount of water. Mix, then add more if the clay is too much like a thick paste. If you're using a single colour, add your clay directly to the lye water to help draw the colour out and give a more intense colour. Use 1 teaspoon per pound or 500 grams of oils. Here are some clays with a finished soap next to them. Herbs and spice make great natural colorants and also have fantastic properties for your skin. There's a list of colours in the resource section to this lecture. They produce numerous colours, but will fade in the sun. However, they won't bleed or migrate. Some are pH sensitive and will morph. For example, beetroot turns yellow and yellow dock turns red. They are considered natural colorants. Here are some botanicals with the finished soap next to them. You can see the beetroot in the middle on the left and how it has turned out yellow. These are, from left to right, top to bottom, spirulina, beetroot, rosehip, indigo,